So as a brief company description here, we can see the key data. I always like to start, situating whoever is listening to us in what we're looking at. So this is a 10-year share price evolution. I guess that some people will already deduct this cyclical company, and I will explain why afterwards. It's a close to 1 billion euros market cap company with a 20% free cash flow yield based on our numbers, 2x enterprise value EBITDA, trading at 5x price to free cash flow. You can see a couple of notes here. These numbers have been calculated deducting the value of Elior. Elior is a food catering leader company in Europe, and Derichebourg owns 48.3%, excuse me, of the company. And that's a key element of the investment thesis, as I will explain just afterwards. It has a 14% return on capital employed. It is mildly leveraged. Nothing we personally think it's something to worry about, 1.2x net debt to EBITDA. And it is trading at very attractive levels as of today. And that's why we consider that it should have a 30% estimated IRR for the next 3-4 years as an investment. It has an insider owner, the founder of the company, or better said, the son of the founder of the company, is still involved with the company. He's the majority owner of the company, which is something that we are usually looking for, to have an alignment with a longer term view. And it weighs 2.5% of our international portfolio as of today. Therefore, it's a meaningful position for us. As in a nutshell, so here we can see some numbers. What I would like to flag or highlight from this slide is basically that Derichebourg is mostly focused on the recycling of metals. It's 95% of the revenues and 90% of EBITDA. It has another less meaningful business unit, which is the public sector services, more stable, though smaller. It represents 5% of revenues and 10% of EBITDA. And then, as I was mentioning before, it has a majority stake in Elior Group, which is another publicly traded French company, leader in France in catering services, with a market cap as of yesterday of 720 million euros. I will describe each of the business units, and then we will hop into the investment thesis. So the recycling business, it's very straightforward. I guess that everybody will have in their mind what metal recycling consists of, but basically it's based in the metal collection from the different urban elements or also industrial hubs, then the grouping, recycling and recovery, waste classification, processing, and perhaps in the processing part of the process is the most value-added element that Derichebourg brings to the table, and then the sale of recycled products. Derichebourg is number one peer or a player in France with close to 40% market share. They're also number one in Spain with a 10% market share, meaningfully below the market share they have in France. But Spain is a country which is still consolidating in the metal recycling business, and it has it is number 4 worldwide. Though worldwide, it's not really meaningful because it's super atomized and it depends a lot on the local jurisdictions. But what we have to take from this slide is that Derichebourg has a clear leadership position in France, in Europe, but mostly in France and Spain. So a bit more color here. These are the sales by region. Obviously, France represents an astounding amount of 70%. Rest of Europe would be 24%, but from here, mostly we are speaking about Spain, although they also have some presence, as you can see in the map, in Belgium, in Central Europe, in Germany, in Hungary, and then they've got a smaller presence in the US and in Mexico, but it's not really relevant. And I'm going to explain just afterwards when we speak about the modes that this is a business in which you need to have regional economies of scale in order to be able to compete properly, because if not, it's very complicated really to make a space and win market share. So We divide the metals recycling business between ferrous metals, i.e. those coming from steel, and non-ferrous metals that I'm going to speak about just afterwards. You can see in the graph that obviously there is a disproportionate amount in terms of volumes coming from ferrous metals, and a smaller amount coming from non-ferrous. So overall, Derichebourg is collecting and processing roughly just above 5 million tons per year. And this is important because even though ferrous metals is the biggest percentage of volumes processed and collected, it represents a lot less in terms of revenues, and we will see afterwards also margins and EBITDA. We can see that that ferrous in 2024 represented something like 4.4 million tons of metals processed, but in terms of revenues, they represented roughly 1.5 billion euros, while in non-ferrous, that we can see at the right of the slide, volumes were just below 800,000 tons in 2024, but revenues were basically the same, even a bit higher than ferrous metals, which clearly indicates that the volumes are pointing in this direction. The element which makes a difference is the price. And what are we talking about when we mention non-ferrous metals? Well, it's a combination of many, right? But coming from industrial activities, but a bunch of different elements also from end-of-life vehicles, i.e. cars that end their life and they are just taken to the scrap plant, or also we would say white electronic goods, I don't know, fridges, washing machines, this kind of stuff, right? So all of these elements are collected and they are processed in a sort of industrial way, and each of the different metals are separated and then processed once again to get to the end product that is being able to sell to the end clients, be it also industrial clients or even sometimes automotive companies. So it's a 100% industrial process end to end. And speak about non-ferrous metals, we can see in terms of volumes that the aluminium represents the majority. Then we've got other, and then we've got copper. But perhaps the most important thing to mention is that even though copper and aluminium, even though copper is a small part in terms of volumes, it represents the biggest chunk in terms of value. And this is clearly because the price of copper per ounce or per ton doesn't matter. It's substantially higher than the ones from other metals, right? So copper and aluminium represent the bulk of the value in non-ferrous metals. And as I was just mentioning, this is a matter of price, right? So we can see here the evolution of the price per ton as a whole for all the metals sold by Derichebourg. But also we made a classification of ferrous versus non-ferrous. We can see that ferrous, it's oscillating, and pretty stable around $300 per ton. But non-ferrous metals, it's above the 2,000 euro per ton mark. And this is basically because of copper and aluminium, as I was mentioning. So there is a clear premium per ton for non-ferrous metals, and that's why Derichebourg has been historically trying to focus their business in these niche markets, as they call them. I'm going to show several graphs of how the price per ton of different metals has evolved for the last 4 or 5 years. We can see aluminium, how it has been evolving. It is obviously cyclical. We see the hiccup during the COVID years, but what I want to show here is the discrepancy of value, like I was mentioning by word, of aluminium, copper, that we're going to see right now, versus ferrous metal. So aluminium oscillating, 2.4 thousand euros, 2.5 thousand euros roughly for the last 3-4 years. Also copper obviously is priced a lot higher. It's a highly demanded metal for basically a lot of industrial processes and verticals. We can see a value oscillating around 9,000 euros per ton. And also lead, which is another non-ferrous metal which is processed, and actually they have a lead refinery in France, which is pretty complicated to have, and it's also priced at a premium. So the second business unit, now that we have touched and I hope understood the first business unit, which is pretty straightforward, the second business unit that is, if you recall, it represents 10% of the EBITDA of Derichebourg, is the public sector services business. And what do they do? It's also very straightforward. Basically, they collect waste door to door, mostly in urban areas, and for Derichebourg, more specifically in the Paris city area where they have a long-term concession. They do urban cleaning also, but mostly, the waste collected door to door is then taken to a collection center and is sorted and transferred to its ultimate destination. This business is based on a concession, therefore it's a very stable business with a settled price, which changes indexed to inflation. And it's true that the margins are not, amazing here, and most especially the volumes are not huge in terms of revenues, but it's a very, stable and non-cyclical business. And this is something which management usually speaks about. And it has minor synergies in terms of collection, also with the recycling of waste metals, but mostly it brings some stability to this inherent cyclicality of metal recycling. And that's why management likes it very much, because when there is a down year in metal recycling that every once in a while they have, they are able to compensate at least partially with this business, which is a lot more stable. Some numbers here, you can see revenue evolution, and obviously the question that will come up to you is what has happened in 23 and 24. Well, here it's a very clear explanation, which is that in 2022, Derichebourg merged their facility management business with Elior, and they sort of spun out, they took it out from Derichebourg, and they just made a transaction acquiring the 48% of Elior that I was mentioning before in exchange for the facility management business. The facility management business, I'm gonna dedicate some words afterwards, but it's basically the management of buildings. It may be public or private buildings in terms of security, cleaning, this kind of stuff. That has several synergies with the food catering business, and it was taken out from Derichebourg and just used as as an exchange in order to obtain a 48% in Elior. That's why revenues fell dramatically, but you can also see that the margins in this facility management business were very low, and that's why even though revenues fell strongly after taking out this business from Derichebourg consolidation environment, the margins stepped up because the public services business had a better margin than the facility management business, and this is important. And now ending up with the last business unit, if we can call it that way, because at the end it's just a majority stake in a publicly traded company called Elior. We also want to describe what Elior is with a quick overview. It's a 720 million euro market cap company with a 9.5% free cash flow yield. Here you can see the share price evolution for the last 10 years. I'm flagging here 2022, which is when the majority stake, the controlling stake, was acquired by Derichebourg in this operation that I just described by giving away the Derichebourg management services business in exchange. It's trading at 7 times price to free cash flow. Therefore, it's not a pricey asset or company as of today. Return on capital employed is 100%, and this is not, I want to clarify, because Elior has a massive moat, but it's mostly because it's super asset light. It's basically based on people and managing people, and therefore it also has some negative working capital, and this is what creates the high return on capital employed. But it's not because it has a very wide moat. It is mildly leveraged, 3 times net debt to EBITDA, and I'm just going to explain why. It's coming from a transformation, from a pure turnaround, because Elior was going through some meaningful problems 2-3 years ago. And we also think that this standalone investment, Elior, has a very attractive internal rate of return in case it was a standalone investment or you can also play it by investing through Derichebourg, who is going to benefit clearly when Elior re-rates in the market, as we think it's going to do in the near future. So clearly, Derichebourg is a controlling shareholder here. We can see the revenue by activity, 72% is catering contracts, and then the 27% that we can see here is what I was describing as multi-services, which is a facility management of buildings mostly. Then we've got the revenue by geography. Clearly, as this is the scenario for MOI, European Investing Summit, this is a European company mostly, with a clear skew towards France and the rest of Europe. They are leader in France, and they are leaders in also in Spain and several other countries in Europe. But when you see the global context, Elior is clearly smaller than other peers like Compass, Aramark, or Sodexo. So as I was mentioning, Elior has undergone restructuring, and this restructuring has started mostly, after Derichebourg getting, the driving or the being behind the driving wheel and getting involved in the company. We can see how EBITDA was fell dramatically, and it was at negative levels in 2020, 2021, and after 2022 there is an inflection point and a return to positive EBITDA margin, and also in absolute terms. Free cash flow has also inflected, which for us, these are the two main indicators, free cash flow and margins, that the company is proving successful in their turnaround. But also debt has been mostly controlled. We're coming from high levels. Previous management at Elior, from our perspective, hadn't been doing the things properly. We can get a bit deeper into that during the Q&A, but basically they had been making some acquisitions, and also they had been promoting from an operating perspective the award of new contracts, even though these new contracts were not positive from a margin perspective. They were loss-making. So they were sort of promoting internally for Salesforce within Elior to increase the top line, but at the expense of margins. And this was, like a bomb within the company. When these contracts were starting to be operated, they were losing money. So what the Elior has been mostly focused on is, cutting costs and getting rid of these bad contracts with private clients, but also with public institutions. So from our perspective, the restructuring plan has been successfully completed. The margins have been improved, and it has already demonstrated for the last 4 or 5 quarters that margins are stable and even growing. Debt reduction is a fact. It was coming from a very high point, and even though it's still elevated, it's far from the covenants that they have with the banks, and it seems to be a manageable situation, and they are still progressing in the debt reduction exercise. The company is generating free cash flow, which for us is of utmost importance, and it is returning to organic growth. So now, going directly into the investment thesis, now that I have tried to explain what the Derichebourg is made of and the different business units,